What can the world of podcasting teach you about thriving in grad school and in life? Well, today I'm going to be talking about 5 lessons that I've learned in 5 years of podcasting. Welcome to the top global ranked and award-nominated Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on conversations about grad school and growth. In this podcast, you'll learn about all things higher education, personal development, and sustainable productivity. This is Dr. Yvette Martinez-Vu, and I will be serving as your Femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to successfully navigate grad school and beyond. For over 14 years, I've been empowering first-gen students of color along their personal and professional journeys, and I'm really excited to support you too. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Yvette. I'm going to start with a brief visual description. I am wearing an orange sleeveless top with some matching orange and white beaded earrings. I've got a black headband. I've got 10 over-ear headphones. I've got a black mic to my bottom left. I am sitting on a white chair with a purple throw. And today is actually a bonus episode. So I decided to bring in a bonus episode because I have a couple of updates. So yes, today's episode is on lessons I've learned from podcasting. But what prompted me to want to record this episode is the fact that I am making some slight changes to my show. So as some of you may have noticed, I did just recently update the cover art for my show. It is very, very similar to the previous version, except that I made some changes to the text, and I also made some slight changes to the image. So with the text, I changed the font of the title of the podcast, Grad School Femtoring, so that it's more legible. It's bolder. It takes up more space so people can see it from afar, because podcast icons, when you look at them in your phone apps, they tend to look really, really tiny. So I want to make sure that for accessibility purposes, people can actually read the title of the podcast. Another thing that I did was I added a title extension, I think that's what it's called, which is to say that instead of it just saying Grad School Femtoring, it says Grad School Stories, Personal Development, and Productivity Tips for First-Gen BIPOCs. So that is my effort to more clearly describe what the podcast is about, what the topics are that you'll learn about, what the purpose of the podcast is. And I do think that storytelling is an overarching thread. I like to bring in some relevant anecdotes at the beginning of my podcast episodes when they're solo shows, or ask my guests to share a little bit more about their backstory. I do think that that's important. And then, of course, aside from demystifying higher ed and the grad school application and navigation process, I am a big fan of helping you on your personal development and growth journey, helping you with improving your productivity while also tending to your well-being. So those are all the areas that I wanted to make sure that new people who discover the show can be clear about, that this is what they're going to get when they subscribe and start listening to it. So that was the other update to the cover art. Now, in terms of updates to the episodes themselves, the material is going to stay the same. I'm still going to do solo episodes. I'm still going to do guest episodes. But the frequency that I share types of episodes is going to change slightly. So this year, I've kind of been experimenting a little bit more than previous years. At the beginning of the year, I was releasing 2 episodes a week. Then I realized in the summer that I needed to slow things down, back down to 1 a week. And that's a pace that has felt really good. And now I'm telling myself that if I'm ever inspired to release a midweek episode, I will release a bonus episode. If I ever want to share something that's timely and that prompts a midweek episode, I'm going to do that. So that's what I did with this show. So for now, you will reasonably expect one episode a week. Every now and then there might be a bonus episode. And also, I'm actually going to be doing more solo episodes. I realized this. I realized that based on my data, most of you listen to my solo episodes more than you listen to my guest episodes. That doesn't come as a surprise to me because that's actually true for me when I listen to episodes by other podcasters. When I listen to their guests, sometimes it's a hit or miss. But when I listen to them, I'm so used to their voice and how they speak and what they talk about that I look forward to hearing from them. And so I want to, pay attention, listen, honor that. And so I'm going to be releasing probably 2 to 3 solo episodes at a time, followed by one guest episode. So that means that I will probably have one guest episode a month, perhaps 2, depending on the month. But I'll try to prioritize 2 to 3 solo episodes at a time and then one guest episode. Okay. So that's what I'm thinking of doing, just to, again, listen to the metrics, listen to what the data is telling me about what folks want to hear more about. Now, the other thing, too, that you might have noticed, going back to the theme of experimentation and changes, I did add ads to my podcast. So I added dynamic ads. That's something that was presented as an option to me after signing up with a podcasting network. I learned about that opportunity. I wanted to try it out. I was new to dynamic ads and I tested it out. And to be honest, I, at this point, don't feel like it's worth it for me. I have just right now turned them off because I feel like they take up a lot of space on my show, and there's no way for me to control what exact ads you get. So I don't like that I don't have control over what companies' ads get placed. I don't like that it takes away from my show. Instead, what I'm thinking of doing is adding my own ads. So promoting my own work, whether it's workshops, my coaching, my other opportunities that I have coming up. So either promoting my stuff or including some sponsored ads by mission-driven companies that are in alignment with what I do. So I am still open to taking sponsorships, and I do still intend to monetize the show to the extent that it will allow me to keep going and to keep this running sustainably. Because right now, it takes up a lot of time. I say this a lot. It takes up a lot of time. And it's an expensive hobby, if you want to call it a hobby. I mean, it's not a hobby for me. I don't treat it like a hobby. If I did, I wouldn't be so consistent. But the fact that I don't really make much from doing it makes it a really expensive thing that I do every week. So I would like to get it to the point where I'm at least covering my expenses related to software. And then ideally, in the long run, I would love to be able to cover the expenses of hiring an editor. Because right now, I don't have someone who does the editing. I do everything for the podcast on my own. All the editing, uploading, the podcast outlining, reaching out to guests, everything is all on my own. So I would love to get some help with that in the future when I do have the budget for it. So that's why you will see some ads, and I'm just going to be more intentional with what ads do show up. And of course, if you don't like them, you can always fast forward. That's what I love about listening to podcasts, is that you've got that fast forward button. You can, just ignore the ads if you want to, unlike other streaming platforms where it doesn't give you that option, which can be pretty annoying. So those are my podcast updates. Now I want to get into the lessons, and this is where I feel like I have so much to say about 5 years in podcasting. I started podcasting in 2019. Technically, I started podcasting way earlier than that in 2017 with the Chicana Motherwork Collective, and I've learned a lot since then. So this is 5 years, technically 7 years if you count the podcast that I did with my comadres and colegas with Chicana Motherwork. But on my own, doing it on my own, I've learned even more so because everything's been on me. And so what are the 5 main lessons that I want to share with you that could be relevant to anyone, not just to podcasters, but anyone who wants to keep learning and growing? Here are the 5 lessons. So I'm going to say them out loud, and then I'm going to go into them more in depth. So the first lesson is, don't be afraid to try new things. The second lesson is, lean into your intuition. The third lesson is, remind yourself of your core values and honor them as best you can. The fourth lesson is, give yourself permission to accept or let go of the things getting in your way of leaning into your growth. And then the fifth lesson is to follow your energy. So let's go back to the first lesson, which is, don't be afraid to try new things. Like I've referenced before, this year, I've tried out several new things in podcasting. Like I said, I tried out dynamic ads. I was new to inserting ads. And you know what? I tried it. I didn't like it. I don't have to keep doing it. I might change my mind later, and that's okay. This is my platform. I get to decide what I do with it. So I've decided that's not for me, at least not now. And I am still open to having sponsors. And especially, it has to be, for me to feel good about it, sponsors who have a shared mission and shared values as me. So I do want to be more selective and more clear about the terms in which I work with other entities to have them as sponsors for my show. So similarly, I have tried out new things when it comes to bringing in guests. I've brought in guests that I've personally reached out to. I've brought in guests that have pitched themselves to me. I have brought in guests that were recommended by my audience members. I mean, all the time, if I meet someone new and I really like them, I will just offer to have them on my show. I'm like, hey, if you ever want to be on the podcast, please feel free, because I'm always thinking about who is the type of person that I would like to introduce to my audience. And with that, that means that because folks have come from very different places, I feel like I'm getting at a point where, because I don't have as many guest spots on my show, and I'm recording months out at a time for guest episodes in particular. So my solo shows, I record a couple of days to maybe a week or two in advance. My guest episodes, I record multiple months in advance. So again, because I have limited spots and because I'm recording months in advance, I want to be more selective about who gets on the show. And by selective, I am talking about folks who really understand the mission, the purpose of the podcast. So again, now that I'm clear about this podcast is about sharing inclusive stories. This podcast is about promoting personal development to first and BIPOCs. This podcast is about sharing productivity tips, because so many members of my audience are either grad students who have a lot to do or neurodivergent folks who are just trying to find ways to survive in this very overwhelming world. Learning about productivity and well-being is really important to me and to my audience. So yeah, that's one thing that I wanted to mention, is that in trying out all these new things, I'm learning to become more protective of my podcast. And it kind of reminds me of the way I am with my kids, where I can be very protective. I can be a mama bear. One thing that you may not know about me that I don't share a lot publicly, because it feels bordering on like way too intimate for me, is that I dealt with child abuse. When I was a kid, there was abuse in my home. There was domestic violence. I don't talk about it a lot. In fact, it's something that's like hush hush and thrown under the rug and not mentioned in my family. And I know that there are other folks who listen to my podcast who have also experienced abuse or come from dysfunctional families. And I was venting to a friend recently about just how firmly I am against spanking or abuse of any kind. I'm like very much anti that. And we were both kind of reflecting on our childhoods, because she too also experienced abuse and violence in her home. And there were three of us in this conversation. And then the other person was like, whoa, I had no idea the extent of the abuse that you two had experienced. And so what does this have to do with my podcast and the lessons that I'm bringing up? It's that I'm very protective. I am very, very protective. I'm such a mama bear. Like, I nurture my kids so much, and I know that I can't protect them from everything. And in some ways, I feel this way. And I know I'm putting this on myself. No one is putting this responsibility on me. I can be very, very hard on myself, but I do feel a strong sense of responsibility with this podcast of like, dude, I got to be more careful, or I got to be more intentional, or I got to be more protective of my audience because you all are listening. Of course, you have the choice. You don't have to listen. You can always stop listening. You can always pause the show. You can always unsubscribe. You can do whatever you want to do. It's your choice always. But at the same time, I do feel this heavy weight of responsibility of like making sure that I am nurturing the show in a way that feels good for me and in a way that I know that it's going to continue to promote my listeners' growth. That's not going to harm them. That's my biggest fear, is ever doing something that could potentially harm others, because I'm like really, really firm on like doing work that is about harm reduction. If we live in really shitty systems, violent systems, exploitative systems, capitalistic systems, and we are always implicated in these systems and we cannot dismantle them, at least maybe it might not happen in our lifetime, then what can we do to minimize harm? So all of this to say is that I've been trying out new things. I've been giving myself permission to try out new things without feeling like, oh my gosh, if I do this one thing, I'm completely ruining my show, or I'm completely ruining or harming my audience. So trying new things, but then also what are the learning lessons for them? And also how can I continue to nurture my audience and make sure that, again, I'm always minimizing harm. So there is that now the podcast is growing. I'm trying to be more intentional than before. And I don't know what's happened recently. It's funny because sometimes we do things and we do it intentionally, and sometimes we do things and we don't even realize it, we're doing it. But in the last month, I had a 40% increase in plays, in listens, of like my monthly listens. And I'm like, hold up, what happened? I don't even know what changed. Other than I've just been leaning into my intuition and everything that comes up with my clients, everything that comes up for me personally, using that as material for what can I offer to my audience to help them. That's all I've been doing. And I guess it's working because there was this big, substantial increase in plays. I'm at over 70,000 listens, which is not a huge number for the amount of time I've been podcasting, but it's also not a small number. I am really proud of where I'm at with my podcast. I feel like it's been growing slowly but surely and really at a sustainable pace, very much in alignment with how my business is growing. I'm not where I want to be financially, but it's growing slowly and steadily, and I'm okay with that. So, oh my gosh, I just took up so much time with the one lesson. Let me be more succinct with the next lessons. So lesson 2 is leaning into your intuition. So I feel like I've already been talking about this, is just reminding myself, and you too, as you do things, if you have a bad feeling about something, listen to that. Because every time I've had a bad feeling about something and then I didn't listen, it came back to bite me. Or the opposite, sometimes lean into the intuition of something that feels good. Like recently, when I put out that episode on disability justice with my 2 guests, I had such a good feeling about it. I felt so good. And guess what? It's actually one of my top played episodes right now. So I find it super interesting that some of my most scary, vulnerable episodes, or the ones that have felt like really, really good, are the ones that have the most listens. So trust your gut, trust your intuition. And then, similar to leaning into your intuition, if you struggle with that, if you're like, oh, I don't know if I trust my intuition, I don't know if I've developed that skill yet, then the other option would be to look for the evidence. So if intuition is hard for you, if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling unsure, if you're feeling uncertain, maybe just figure out like, what is the evidence that's around you that's showing you what is and isn't working? And so for me, it means if I'm struggling with my intuition, then maybe looking at the data. What are the shows that are most played? What are the shows that are least played? What are people listening to more? Is it the solo shows? Is it the guest shows? Is it certain topics? And then going with that. Same thing can be true for you. The next lesson is to remind yourself of your core values and honor them as best as you can. So I recently turned down a sponsorship request. And you know what? It wasn't something that was easy for me to do. It was actually a pretty great collaboration with an organization that has a shared audience and a shared mission. But unfortunately, there was a lot of back and forth that happened at the last minute. And whether or not they intended to do this, it made me feel as if they weren't honoring my time and energy. And again, this is not personal in that perhaps this is just their work culture. This is just how they do their work. But it's also not how I work. And it's also not how I have to work. So because of that, I had to turn them down, and I had to remind them like, hey, as a disabled entrepreneur, it's important for me to not do things rushed, to not do things at the last minute, to honor my time and energy, especially in light of my other ongoing commitments. And, this also reminds me of another learning lesson that I got from this year about, this is unrelated to you all potentially, but think about the agreements that you make with people. Like, get things in writing. If you're working with an advisor, if you're working with a professor, like, get things in writing. So for me, that means I always have a contract for things now, especially when I'm working with companies and organizations. I'm no longer going to be doing free work, and I'm no longer going to be doing work without a signed contract, because I've had that come back and bite me, where someone would be like, oh, we'd love to have you on as a speaker. And can you interview someone on your podcast? And then I went and interviewed the person, and then afterward they ghosted me and never followed up on the speaking opportunity. So that to me is not okay. That's why I no longer work without either a contract or something in writing that I can use just to protect myself. So my values there have to do with me valuing safety, me valuing slowness, me valuing integrity. And it's also, I feel like those three are related to my greater core value of compassion. I'm not going to compromise on me being compassionate and gentle with myself in exchange for working with a specific company or organization. And I need to remind myself that, because it can be tempting sometimes, especially when you're like, I got to pay the bills. I got to find a way to make ends meet. But also I got to take care of myself, and I got to make sure I don't flare up and make myself sick doing so. So there's that. The fourth lesson is to give yourself permission to accept or let go of the things getting in your way of your growth. This is a hard one. Oh my gosh. It is so hard. So I mentioned earlier that I feel this like deep weight and deep sense of responsibility with my podcast and just in general with my platform. And I don't even have a huge platform. I don't know how content creators do it, where they might have 10K, 50K, 100K people on their platform, and they don't feel that deep weight or pressure. I guess this is where we're different. Everybody's different. But for me, I realized, wait, I can let go of that. I don't have to feel that pressure and that responsibility. Or if I don't want to let go, then maybe I need to start to accept it. And in accepting it, then I need to acknowledge that this is something that I'm going to need support with. So, for example, okay, aside from the podcast growth that's going on for me, I'm also trying to work towards making a bigger income, because my take-home pay is very little, unfortunately. And even though I've had students whose programs have paid for me to coach them, And I remember one time one of those students told me, oh, this is why you're getting paid the big bucks. So I'm very transparent about my rates. You can find my rates on my website for all the things. Like, I don't hide that stuff. That's part of my, again, commitment to accessibility. So you can see over time my rates have gone up, and they do reflect market value. They do reflect my credentials. They do reflect my experience. And every time it has gone up and I've had to make the tough decision to increase my rates, I have broken down. I have really struggled, and I have needed someone to sit with me, to help me to process that. Whether that's my therapist, whether it's my business coach, whether it's my partner, whether it's my friends, my colleagues. Like, I tap into my network because it actually feels unsafe for me to do so. Like, my body goes into fight or flight and it feels unsafe. And it's because of, again, it's rooted in that strong sense of responsibility that I feel of, once I make more money, then what am I going to do with it? And I know, I don't know why I have this fear. I know that I am going to use it in ways that still honor my values. So I'm going to use it to make sure I can take care of myself and my family, to make sure I can do the things that I haven't been able to do, like tend to my health more, see specialists, like keep working on myself, because the better I am, the more I can work on myself and my overall well-being, not just my physical health, but my overall well-being, the better I can show up for others, the more I can support others, the more I can do this long term. So there's that. And then also that means that I'll have more resources. So access, money as a resource, access to support others. Like right now, when folks send me their requests for mutual aid, if it's someone I know personally, if it's someone that I have a connection with, I do my best, even though I don't have a lot of money, I do my best to support. Even if it's a small amount, I try to offer something. And I would love to not have to question whether or not I can afford to go see a friend who lives on the other side of the country. I would love to not have to question whether or not I want to take a vacation, because I haven't taken a vacation in a while, actually. And it's not even in alignment with what I preach. Like, I tell folks, slow down, take time. Of course, I do slow down and take time for myself and take time off, but I haven't taken like a legit vacation in a while because of budget restraints. And so, yeah, that's just all of this to say that for me, and I said, give yourself permission to accept or let go. I don't think I'm going to let it go, that deep sense of responsibility. But I can definitely just accept it and know that this is part of my process, and know that with each level of growth, that feeling of responsibility is still going to be there, and that I can just know that it's there, get extra support if I need to, and not let it hold me back. So there's that. And then, okay, here's the last one. The last one is to follow the energy. Why am I ending this way? So it's actually something that I talked about in my recent workshop with Camila Lax Zapien. In fact, it's available, the recording. If you want to purchase it, you can get the recording, even though we already did it live. It's available for purchase if you want to check it out. I'll put the link in the show notes. But yeah, one of my main points, there are different things that I talk about in that workshop, but one of my main points is to make sure that you follow the energy. That, I talk about thinking about your systems and the way that you do things and how this can help you to increase your self-confidence. Because for me, having systems that support me, support how my body, mind, and spirit work is really important. And so for me, a lot of people talk about time management. I really love talking about energy management, because it's not about how much time I have. It's about the capacity that I have. And sometimes you can literally have nothing on your calendar and still feel burnt out. And why is that? Because maybe you don't have anything on your calendar, but you're beating yourself up the entire time that you're doing nothing. And that is really, really draining. So follow the energy. That means notice it. What are you doing that gives you energy? What are you doing that depletes you? And listen to that. So for me, I actually love recording podcast episodes. That's why I've been doing it. I keep doing it because it actually really energizes me. And I love doing my solo shows. I love doing my guest episodes. I actually love the solo episodes more, but I also like the guest episodes because I always learn something new and I get to connect with a really dope new person. So that feels good. But then I was like, oh, let me experiment and let me try adding ads and sponsors. And I realized that was depleting me, that even thinking about it was depleting me, about having to think about, is this in alignment with my podcast, etc. And so I'm just gonna, like, if I'm gonna add ads, I'm gonna make sure that they feel good, that they're not depleting me. And if I don't, I don't. Or if I just focus on promoting my own stuff, that's fine. I've had to do a lot of work in terms of feeling comfortable enough to even promote my stuff. But I'm like, if I'm going to promote anything, I might as well promote my stuff because I actually believe in my stuff. I actually believe in the work that I'm doing, and I actually believe that it can help others. So there's that. And then, like, just thinking about how it could relate to you as a listener following the energy, let me give you an example of one of my clients. We just recently met, and she's in the middle of writing her master's thesis, and she applied to this teaching fellowship, and to her surprise, she got it, and she was not sure if she was going to accept it. And then after talking it out, she realized that teaching is one of those things that really energizes her, that teaching is something that can be incorporated into her me time, into her professional development time. And so thinking about it as this is the thing that actually is energizing me helped her to decide to accept the fellowship. Even though it's going to take time away from her writing her thesis, it's going to take time away in a way that's going to tend to her needs and give her a lot back. So that was a decision that for her, that was her following the energy. And she feels really good about it. And that's what I want for you in general. Just like learn from my 5 years of podcasting. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've, in some ways, you could see some things that I've done as forms of failure, and I've learned from it. And that's all that I ask of you too, is to learn and grow, because I feel like that's the main point of the podcast is if you're here, it's because you love to learn. It's because you are interested in your own growth. So like I said, listen or learn from me and try new things. Listen to your intuition. Remind yourself to honor your core values. Give yourself permission to accept or let go of the things that are getting in the way of you leading into your growth, and follow the energy. That's it for this episode. I hope that you got something from it. And as always, I'll talk to you all next time. Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. If you like what you heard, here are 4 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. If you email me a screenshot, I'll send you a surprise freebie. The second way is to get your copy of my free Grad School Femtoring Resource Kit, which includes essential information to prepare for and navigate grad school. You can access it at the link in today's show notes. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @GradSchoolFemtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. The last way to show your love is to order a copy of Is Grad School for Me, my graduate school admissions book for first-gen BIPOCs. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.